is about God hearing our cry. So I have been in the book of Ruth for quite a while now. I'm sure, as you know, I spend lots of time on one thing, but it always relates to many other different parts. And Ruth is a phenomenal character, phenomenal woman. She's a virtuous woman. The woman painted in Proverbs 1, the picture you'd be looking for would be Ruth. But today is about God hearing our cry. And usually, when we're crying, it's because we're in pain, it's because we're hurt, it's because we need something, or we are in need of things that we just haven't gotten yet. So, I've been learning that God does hear our cry. It reminds me of the words of King Hezekiah in the Second Kings 18, where he prays after he gets the letter from the king of Assyria, and he's praying and he says, God, please open your ears and open your eyes to see. It also reminds me of Hannah in First Samuel 1, where she says, or rather, where the Bible records after Hannah's prayer that, and the Lord remembered Hannah. And of course, I'll do a deep dive because I want to understand what the Bible means when it means God remembered. Does that mean that God forgets? Does that mean that God puts us aside for a moment and doesn't reckon with our feelings and our hurts? And then I'm like, that can't be it, because we do not have a high priest who is not touched with the feelings of our infirmities, of our weaknesses. So we have a high priest who was tempted in every way as we are, and yet was without sin. So if I have Jesus, my high priest, who went through all the hurt I went through, then it's hard to believe that God would then forget me. So I'll think about God remembering Hannah. When you say God remembered Hannah, I can't think of the Hebrew word off the top of my head, but God remembering Hannah would be that God finally acted upon particular thing. So it's not that God forgot Hannah, it was that God decided this was the time to act, that the promise is sure, she will get a son. It's only a matter of when. Now, of course, we only see one of Hannah's prayers when she's in the temple and Eli tells her, are you drunk? And eventually she says no, she's praying, and, he essentially blesses her prayer. And afterwards, she has a son. And obviously, it always, I think, especially when we're reading stories in the Bible, it always feels like they prayed now and they got the answer later. And I'm reading Second Kings 18, and I see Hezekiah go before God and pray. It always seems like the answer came like in the very next verse, like a few verses after. We see the writer, or at least the English translation, the NIV, I believe, would start with after some time, then God. And then it makes me think how much time passed. Because, when English speakers say after some time, after a while, depending on the context, a while could mean years. And some time could mean a few moments. It couldn't be very long, or it could be a few days. But a while. And then and then I'm just like, okay, so I really don't know how much time passed between the time Hezekiah prayed and the time the prophet Isaiah came and told Hezekiah that this was how the king of Assyria would be destroyed. So Hezekiah was essentially in a waiting position, waiting for God to answer, waiting and waiting and waiting. The other day, I was thinking and essentially laughing to myself that because the Bible plan I'm on, lots of Psalms, and I was thinking that the psalmist, I mean, David is always crying. And I just said that, and I was like, yeah, David is always crying. And I was like, yeah, it feels like me because these days I feel like I'm always crying on some certain subject. Like I'm always in I don't want to say distress, but in a particular level of uncomfortability. Like I'm just not okay. And it's like, okay, the psalmist wasn't okay either. He was very distressed. He was stressed out. And even though I know there's good stress now, it still doesn't take away from the fact that stress is burdensome. But, Matthew 11:28-30 tells us that we should cast all our cares and burdens, that we should, come to Jesus, all who are weary and have heavy burden, because he will give us rest, that there is rest in God. And I think in my last video essay I mentioned that there's rest in God. But more than anything, when I think of the psalmist, I think of his words in Psalm 91. I think of it throughout a lot of his psalms that I can't mention off the top of my head, but particularly Psalm 91, because it relates back to Ruth.